Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another week of Parsha. As I'm sure you recall, we are currently in the middle of reading the third book of Chumash, the book of Vayikra. Vayikra means he called. And for the whole book of Vayikra, it's called that because, I'm sorry. Hello? Hello, who is it? It's Hashem calling. Hashem, who are you calling for? Hashem is calling for Moshe. Hashem, I've got to get the phone back to Moshe. I have to get back to Parsha. I know. Hashem isn't really calling on my cell phone. But for the whole book of Vayikra, Hashem is calling Moshe to give instructions about the Mishkan that we just finished building at the end of the book of Shemot. Now, the name of this week's Parsha is called Behar, which means at the mountain. And the Parsha is called Behar, at the mountain, because it starts off by reminding us that everything said in this Parsha is still said at Har Sinai, where we got the Torah, where we heard the 10 commandments directly from Hashem. We're still there. Everything of this Parsha is at Har Sinai too. And what is at Har Sinai in this Parsha? It starts off by telling us that once the Jewish people get into Israel, the land of Israel deserves time to rest, just like we get time to rest. Every 7 days we have Shabbat. And every 7 years, the land gets its own Shabbat called Shemitah. For the 7th year, every 7th year, the land gets to rest, which means that we don't plant, we don't do any gardening, we don't plant seeds in the ground, and we don't harvest. We don't gather things up. We don't pick the things that grow on the ground for us to eat to save up for later. If you really want to eat something that grows from the ground that year, you can pick something to eat it right away, but you can't put any in your pockets or your bag to save for later. So anything that's growing, the animals can eat, anyone can pick anything from anywhere to eat right away. And the rest of the time we eat food that we saved up from the year before. And then the Parsha says, we're going to count up 7 of those Shemitah years, which means 7 times 7 years. That's 49 years. And in the 50th year, the year after those 49 years, it's going to be called the Yovel year. And to start the Yovel year off, at the end of Yom Kippur, at the beginning of the Yovel year, we're going to blow the shofar. And when we do that, 3 things happen. Number 1, the land gets to rest again. And Hashem says, don't worry, I promise, even though that's 2 years in a row, the land rests and we don't pick anything, I promise that the year before that, the year before the Shemitah year, before this, we'll have so much food growing that we'll have enough for the next 2 years. Number 2, the next thing that happens when we blow the shofar at the start of the Yovel year is that all the land returns to its original owners. Now, what does this mean? When the Jewish people go into Israel for the first time, every family is going to get their own piece of land in Israel. The whole land is going to be divided up to everybody. And then people are allowed to buy and sell their land, except every 50 years, it goes back to the person who had it first when we first went into Israel. Or if they're not around to their kids or their kids' kids, it goes back to the family who first had that land 50 years before. And the Parsha says, if somebody sells their land to somebody who's not Jewish. Now, people who aren't Jewish, they don't have to follow the rules in the Torah. They don't have to give the land back, but it's your responsibility to make sure the land goes back to its original owner's family. So if you sold your land to somebody who's not Jewish, then by the Shemitah year, it's your job to buy the land back from them. And if you don't have the money to buy the land back from them, then it's the job of your whole family, whoever can afford it, to buy the land back so that it can go back to the family of the person who owned it. And since everyone, there is an exception to this though. The Parsha says, if you sell land that's inside a city with a wall around it, then the rule of it going back in the Yovel doesn't apply. Then you only have 1 year that you can buy it back automatically. And after that 1 year, even when the Yovel year comes, even when the 50th year comes, you don't get it back because it's inside a city. But there's an exception to the exception. The Torah says that if somebody's from Shevet Levi and they sell their land that's inside a city with a wall around it, then they get it back in the Yovel year, in the 50th year, even though it's in a city with a wall, because Levis only get land in cities with walls, and it's not fair for them to lose all their land. But anyone else wouldn't get it back. And since we know, the Parsha says, since we know that when we sell somebody our land, we get it back in the 50th year, in the Yovel year, we have to charge fair prices. You have to take into account the fact that you're really only selling it for however many years you have left until the Yovel year. So charge something fair. And speaking of charging fair amounts, the Parsha also says, don't charge your fellow Jew unfair interest. Now, interest is when, let's say you lend somebody money. Now they have to pay you back the money eventually that you lent them, but interest is if they have to pay you back more money than what you lent them, because it's like they're paying you for the time that they get to use your money for. And usually the longer they take before they pay you back, the more interest they have to pay, the more extra money they have to pay. But the Parsha says we don't charge our fellow Jews interest. Banks charge people interest. That's how banks make money. But we don't lend people our money just to make money. We lend people our money to help out a friend who needs help. So we shouldn't be charging interest when we're lending money to our fellow Jew to be nice. And the Parsha says, the third thing that happens in the Yovel year is anyone who's working for somebody else, like living in their house and working for them full time, gets to go home in the Yovel year and be their own boss again. And there's a few reminders about that. The Parsha says if your fellow Jew is working for you, you have to treat them nicely. You have to treat them like your family and not ask them to do anything that you wouldn't do yourself. And also, if somebody ends up working for somebody who's not Jewish and doesn't have to follow the rules of Yovel, the rules of the Torah, then it's the responsibility of that person's family, or if they don't have the money, of everyone in the Jewish people to buy them back, to pay money to the person they're working for, so that Jewish person can go home and be their own boss again in the Yovel year. And the Parsha ends with a reminder that we don't ever pray to idols, we only pray to Hashem, and a reminder that we should treat Shabbat and the Beit HaMikdash with respect. And that is the end of Parshat Behar. Shabbat Shalom.